Yes, let's celebrate the art and science of advertising this morning. One of the great skills of the 20th century, immortalised in the TV series Mad Men. There are many great names in the pantheon of advertising giants, from the sublime wordsmith David Ogilvy to the enigmatic Saatchi brothers. Legendary figures like Bill Bernbach, who can forget those great Volkswagen ads, and Leo Burnett and his Depression-era Apples too, of course. And here in Australia, the titans of the advertising industry, like the brilliant Gary Horner, or the supremely gifted Lionel Hunt, and of course the great Ted Horton, all geniuses in their own way. But now, a new name must be added to that mighty list of advertising icons. And I refer, of course, to our very own Don Draper Down Under, the extraordinarily gifted and talented advertising creative guru, Paul Barry. Yes, folks, working right here in Sydney, under our very noses, beavering away in the bowels of the ABC, of all places, where I don't think they realise just how special he is. Paul Barry surely belongs in the gallery of advertising greatness, thanks to his tireless efforts to promote this show, Outsiders. And in particular, I have to modestly admit, to promote me to whole new audiences who I would never be able to reach otherwise. Thank you, Paul Barry, from the bottom of my heart. Yet again, you devoted an entire segment of your otherwise rather dreary Media Watch program to promoting me and to promoting this show, Outsiders. And what a promotion it was. At one point, I thought I must have died. There was so much amazing footage of me going back years and years as Paul Barry gave a glowing tribute to this show, the likes of which money cannot buy, and featuring some of my very favourite skits that were so old I'd forgotten just how brilliant they were, such as this one.
Here is Dean and his then co-host Ross Cameron in 2017, pouring scorn on climate scientists' warnings that global warming will cause sea levels to rise.
It's gone up by about a millimetre.
Rising sea levels. You got it?
I've got it. 3 mil.
3 mil.
Media Watch had a crack at that one too, and at this segment in 2018, in which Dean suggested the world isn't warming.
Brilliant. Paul Barry, of course, invented the famous cat's bum, pursed lips look of disapproval, whereby it looks like he's disapproving of my work, but clearly he is a huge secret fan. Sheer genius. Again, I must say on behalf of us all here on Outsiders, thank you, Paul Barry. You do a great job. Although what poor old insiders, that's the show where a bunch of lefties sit on a couch agreeing with each other until the audience dozes off. What insiders must think about Paul Barry feverishly selling Outsiders every other week is beyond me. There you go. It's a funny old world. And speaking of funny old worlds, here's something to puzzle over. Why is it that whenever seemingly intelligent, normal, everyday people get a job in government or government bureaucracies, all their common sense goes out the window, and before you know it, they've been completely captivated by the left? It happens all the time. Think of Tim Wilson, a decent common sense bloke who worked at the IPA, a great, great organisation. But as soon as he left the IPA and got into Parliament, he turned into a screaming climate change nutter.
Only the coalition can really be trusted to address the challenges of climate change while taking the whole Australian community with us.
Well, no, you didn't, actually. You lost the election. So it didn't work out so well then, did it, Tim? Then there's Chin Leong Tan, our Human Rights Race Commissioner. Chin Leong Tan is the Malaysian-born lawyer turned academic who migrated to Melbourne from Malaysia with his Chinese parents in the 1980s and was then appointed Racial Discrimination Commissioner in 2018. When he was appointed to the role, I, along with many others, was relieved and indeed specifically praised him. On this show, we talked about how great he was for saying in his very first days on the job, and I quote, that it's a misconception to say Australia is a racist country. I'll repeat that. It's a misconception to say that Australia is a racist country. Touché. And Chin Leong Tan was not making this point lightly or flippantly. He was directly contradicting his predecessor in the job, the blowhard Tim Soutphommasane, who was obsessed with lambasting Australians about their supposed racism. He even wrote a book about it. Worse, so obsessed with the idea that white people are all racist, Tim Soutphommasane and the Human Rights Commission were responsible for this appalling and disgusting ad made with your money, which ran on Australian televisions.
Allow me.
Thank you.
Oh,
That's right.
harrowing.
In Soutphommasane's view of white Australian men, we deliberately make sure women of colour don't get into the same lift as us. What sort of a message is that to send to new immigrants coming to this country? What does that say to children about their dads? Literally one of the most repellent ads ever run in this nation, but useful because it exposed the actual mindset of the left in this country. We were talking about it earlier in the show, and the left-leaning institutions that we are supposed to pay heed to. But this was the level of race baiting that Soutphommasane had inflicted on us. So when Chin Leong Tan succeeded him and made those sensible, sober comments, remember, it's a misconception, he said, to say Australia is a racist nation. Well, I, and as I said, many others applauded him for it. Indeed, Chin Tan told SBS News shortly after his appointment, he was appointed by Christian Porter, he said, "I've always espoused the view that Australia, compared to many other countries around the world, has a far better system, in the sense that it is a non-discriminatory system right across. And that has given us the backbone to be able to find opportunities in this country as well." Hear, hear, well said. And Chin Tan added, and I quote, "I see my role as uniting, because race should never be an issue which divides Australia." Again, I'll repeat that. Race should never be an issue which divides Australians. Wow. That statement came as a huge relief, a complete contradiction of all that nonsense in the lift and all the rest of it. Australians are fed up with falsely being accused of racism every time they switch on the ABC. So that was a relief. And we saw yet again last night during the coronation that sort of race baiting. So let me repeat Chin Tan's words. Race should not be an issue which divides Australians. Now, that's what Chin Tan said then. But how times change. Clearly, Chin Tan has now been captured by the left. Recently, he decided to weigh in on the debate about The Voice. And I'm sorry to say, I find his remarks reprehensible. First up, writing in The Guardian, he said, without a hint of irony, a line that's almost straight out of George Orwell's Animal Farm. He said, "Equality does not mean we are all treated the same." Yes, you heard that right. According to the Race Discrimination Commissioner writing in The Guardian, whose salary you pay, by the way, out of your taxes, he says, equality does not mean we are all treated the same. Or as Orwell himself put it, all animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others. Well done, lefties. You've completely captured and politically corrupted this bloke. 5 years ago, Chin Tan correctly said race should not be an issue which divides Australian. Now the same man says that, for example, creating an Indigenous voice to Parliament presents an opportunity for Australians to overcome racism and discrimination. Oh, so now we have to overcome it, even though we don't have it. So there you have the complete inversion for all of you to see. 5 years ago, Chin Tan said racism is bad. We mustn't allow it to divide us. Today, that fine sentiment has been so thoroughly perverted and forgotten that we actually get Chin Tan asserting that racism has been a major feature in shaping Australian society, its structures, laws and institutions. Really? Where's the evidence for that extraordinary claim? We are probably the most successful multiracial and multicultural country in the world. Then Chintan claims entrenched racism has subjected Indigenous Australians to systemic discrimination for generations. Really? Entrenched racism, systemic discrimination? Haven't we had the 1967 referendum, Mabo, land rights, native title, sorry days, sorry ceremonies, a whole host of bureaucracies, NAIDOC days, Indigenous days, weeks and events, not to mention billions and billions of taxpayers' dollars devoted to Indigenous Australia? That's entrenched racism and systemic discrimination, is it, Mr. Tan? But then comes this comment, and in case you ever wondered where all this is heading, this voice stuff, Chintan spells it out. The rights of Indigenous people, which Australia has long acknowledged in both domestic and international law, apparently, include the right to self-determination. And what does self-determination mean? Well, you go onto the Australian Human Rights Commission website and see if you can decipher it. I tried, it's meaningless gobbledygook. They say self-determination is an ongoing process of choice, right? Whatever, what isn't? To ensure that Indigenous communities are able to meet their social, cultural and economic needs. Yep. It is not, they say, about creating a separate Indigenous state, but, they say, without self-determination, it is not possible for Indigenous Australians to fully overcome the legacy of colonisation and dispossession. Now, this is leftist legal sophistry and obfuscation of the worst kind. Now, clearly, people like Senator Lydia Thorpe or all those characters yesterday on the ABC, they insist we are all living on stolen land and must either get off it or pay reparations. Well, they know what self-determination looks like, and it doesn't include you or me. And yes, it appears our once sensible, now completely captured race commissioner agrees with them. What a tragedy, but this is what happens within all our institutions. The fight for genuine equality of religion, of the sexes, of class and of race is what has defined Western democratic history from the Enlightenment onwards, through emancipation, through the suffragette movement, Martin Luther King, and to the present day. Now the new fascists, the woke left, openly boast that inequality is their goal, all in the name, of course, of fighting racism and discrimination. In other words, vote yes to the voice, because equality does not mean we are all treated the same.